Imagine a young woman born into the lap of luxury, the granddaughter of one of the most powerful media moguls in history. She seems to have it all: wealth, privilege, and status. But on one cold February night in 1974, Patty Hearst, the heir to the Hearst Empire, was kidnapped from her home, setting off a chain of events that would leave the world questioning the true nature of her captivity. Was Patty Hearst a helpless victim of a radical revolution? Or did she willingly join the violent group that abducted her? In this gripping series, we'll explore every angle of Patty's story: the mystery of her kidnapping, the psychological forces at play, and the way the media turned her into a worldwide sensation. Join us as we uncover the truth behind one of the most infamous cases in American history: the life of Patty Hearst. The early life of Patty Hearst. Patricia Campbell Hearst was born on February 20th, 1954, in San Francisco, California, to Randolph Hearst and Catherine Wood Campbell Hearst. Growing up in the shadow of the Hearst Corporation's vast empire, Patty's early years were marked by wealth, privilege, and fame. Her grandfather, William Randolph Hearst, had built a media dynasty that spanned newspapers, magazines, and radio stations across the country. By the time Patty was born, the Hearst family had everything money could buy, and then some. But what was life like for a young girl in this gilded world? The Hearst family was often under the public eye, and Patty, as the daughter of a prominent media mogul, felt the weight of expectations from an early age. Her father, Randolph, was emotionally distant, more focused on managing the family business than nurturing his children. Her mother, Catherine, though loving, had her own obligations in the social elite world. For Patty, this was a life of contradictions. On one hand, she had every material possession she could ever want. On the other hand, there was an overwhelming sense of loneliness and isolation. She attended elite schools and lived in a lavish mansion, but she never seemed to fit in. Patty was a young woman searching for something, anything that could give her life meaning. Little did she know, she was about to be thrust into a situation where her very identity would be torn apart, leaving her to question who she truly was. But just as Patty struggled to find her place in the world of the wealthy elite, the world outside was changing rapidly. The 1970s were a time of turmoil. Radical politics were on the rise, and Patty's life would soon collide with the world of revolutionaries who wanted to overthrow the very system she represented. The rise of the Symbionese Liberation Army would change everything. A portrait of 1970s America. The 1970s in America were a time of division and unrest. The Vietnam War was still raging. Anti-government sentiment was at an all-time high, and the civil rights movement had sparked a wave of social change. Across the country, people were questioning authority, capitalism, and the power structures that kept the status quo intact. It was in this turbulent climate that the Symbionese Liberation Army, SLA, emerged, a radical group that believed in overthrowing the American government and its capitalist foundations. Led by a charismatic and radical leader, Donald DeFreeze, the SLA claimed to represent the disenfranchised and oppressed. They wanted to ignite a revolution, and they saw violence as a necessary tool to achieve their goals. Their manifesto called for the destruction of the establishment, and they were determined to make their voices heard, no matter the cost. For the SLA, Patty Hearst was the perfect target. She was the granddaughter of a media mogul, living in the lap of luxury while the oppressed suffered. Her kidnapping wasn't just about ransom. It was about sending a message. Patty's abduction was a political act, a direct attack on the power structure the SLA despised. But what did Patty think of all this? Was she just an innocent victim caught in a political game? Or was there more to her story? On February 4th, 1974, Patty's world would be shattered forever. As she slept in her apartment in Berkeley, armed, men would break into her home and take her away. But this wasn't just a kidnapping. It was the beginning of a political campaign that would consume her life and the media for months to come. The world would soon learn that Patty Hearst was no longer just a wealthy heiress. She had become a pawn in a radical game. The SLA, radical revolutionaries or terrorists. The Symbionese Liberation Army, SLA, was not your typical political group. It was born out of frustration with America's social and political systems, but the methods they used to protest were anything but conventional. Led by DeFreeze, the SLA was made up of former criminals and radical thinkers who believed the system needed to be destroyed. To them, violence was justified, even necessary, to bring about social change. Their tactics included bombings, robberies, and kidnappings, all in the name of revolution. The SLA's manifesto declared war on the capitalist class, which they saw as responsible for the oppression of the working class and minorities. In their eyes, Patty Hearst was the perfect symbol of that class. Kidnapping her was not just about securing a ransom, it was about humiliating and destroying the system she represented. But were the SLA's actions justified? Were they misguided, idealists? Or were they simply terrorists using violence to gain attention for a cause that had already been discredited? And what about Patty? Was she just an innocent victim caught in the middle of a radical political movement? Or was she being used for a much larger, more dangerous purpose? On that fateful night in February 1974, Patty was taken from her apartment, and the media frenzy began. But what happened in those early days of captivity? Did Patty resist, or did she begin to identify with her captors? As the SLA issued statements, the world was left wondering, what was Patty Hearst's role in this unfolding drama? The Kidnapping Night, February 4th, 1974. The night Patty Hearst was kidnapped was violent and swift. Around 9 p.m. on February 4th, 1974, Patty was in her apartment in Berkeley when she was confronted by members of the SLA. Armed with guns, the captors bound her, blindfolded her, and forced her into a van. In a matter of minutes, Patty's life was no longer her own. She had been taken by a radical group that had no intention of letting her go without a fight. The world was rocked by the news of the kidnapping. The Hearst family was devastated, and the FBI immediately began a nationwide search. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that this wasn't just an ordinary kidnapping. The SLA was using Patty as a tool to send a message to the world, and they were prepared to escalate their violence to achieve their goals. For Patty, the days following her abduction must have been filled with fear and confusion. What was happening to her? Was she going to die at the hands of these radical extremists? Or was there some chance she would escape this nightmare? The public was watching, and Patty's fate seemed more uncertain than ever. As the days passed, the SLA's demands became clear. They wanted food to be distributed to the poor. They wanted radical change. And Patty Hearst was at the center of it all. But the real shock came when Patty appeared in a videotape, holding a machine gun and pledging allegiance to her captors. What had happened to Patty? Was she a victim, or had she become something else entirely? The family's struggle, the Hearst family, meanwhile, was fighting a different battle. They were desperate to find Patty and bring her back home, but they faced public ridicule and mounting pressure from the media. Despite their immense wealth and influence, the Hearsts were powerless to stop the SLA's brutal tactics. The family offered a multi-million-dollar ransom for Patty's release, but the SLA rejected it, demanding instead that their political agenda be supported. The Hearst family was caught between a rock and a hard place. They couldn't negotiate with terrorists, but they also couldn't stand by and do nothing while their daughter was held captive. In the midst of this turmoil, Patty's story became the center of a media firestorm. Every new development, every new letter or video from the SLA was broadcast across the world. The public was obsessed with the case. Was Patty alive? Was she being brainwashed? The media was quick to sensationalize the situation, feeding into the narrative of a privileged young woman caught in the crosshairs of radical politics. But was this story as simple as it appeared? Then, in a shocking turn, Patty appeared in a video, holding a machine gun and pledging loyalty to the SLA. This video would change everything. Was this an act of brainwashing, or had Patty truly become one of them? Patty's transformation from victim to ally. When Patty Hearst appeared in the now infamous video, the world was stunned. No longer the terrified heiress, Patty was now standing beside her captors, holding a weapon and proclaiming her allegiance to their cause. The video shocked the public and sparked an avalanche of questions. Was this the same young woman who had been kidnapped just weeks earlier? Was she being forced to do this, or had she willingly joined the SLA's fight for revolution? Psychologists would later suggest that Patty might have developed Stockholm Syndrome, a psychological phenomenon where hostages begin to identify with their captors. This theory seemed plausible, given the intensity of Patty's captivity. But what if it wasn't just Stockholm Syndrome? What if Patty had genuinely embraced the radical politics of the SLA? As Patty's actions grew bolder, including her participation in the infamous San Francisco bank robbery, public opinion became sharply divided. Some saw her as a victim, manipulated by a ruthless group of radicals. Others saw her as a willing accomplice, choosing to join in the SLA's violent actions. Patty's participation in the bank robbery was a turning point. As the FBI closed in on her, the question became, was she still a victim? Or had she crossed a line from which there would be no return? What would the legal system say? The next chapter in Patty's saga was set to unfold in a courtroom. The role of media in shaping public opinion. Throughout the entire ordeal, the media played a crucial role. Patty's kidnapping, her transformation into an SLA member, and her eventual arrest became a media spectacle. The press seized on the story, creating a narrative that was both sensational and dramatic. But how much of the story was shaped by the media, and how much was reality? Was Patty a victim of radical brainwashing, or was she simply a criminal who had been caught in the act? The media's portrayal of Patty Hearst shifted with each new development. Early on, she was presented as a helpless victim, her family desperate to bring her home. But as she joined the SLA in their violent activities, the media began to cast her in a much darker light. As a willing participant in a revolutionary movement that sought to destroy the very system she had once been a part of. In the end, Patty would face a trial that would determine her fate. But even as the court proceedings began, the question remained, was she truly guilty of the crimes she was accused of, or was she a victim of a radical, manipulative force? The return to the public eye on September 18, 1975, Patty Hearst was arrested by the FBI. After months of hiding with her captors and committing crimes in their name, Patty was captured. But when she was taken into custody, it wasn't just the SLA that had captured her. It was the media's obsession with her story and the public's need to understand what had happened that kept her in the spotlight. Patty had been at the center of a media circus from the moment she was kidnapped, and her arrest marked the beginning of another chapter in the case that had captivated America. As Patty Hearst stood trial, the world watched, and the question on everyone's mind was this: what was the truth? Was she guilty of the crimes she had committed, or was she simply a victim of circumstances beyond her control? The answer, it seemed, depended on who you asked. The trial. A nation divided. The trial of Patty Hearst began in 1976, and it was nothing short of a spectacle. From the moment she was arrested, the media had been obsessed with her story, and the courtroom became just another stage for the drama to unfold. The question that loomed over the trial was whether Patty would be convicted of the crime she had committed, or if she would be seen as a victim of radical manipulation. The defense team, led by famous attorney F. Lee Bailey, argued that Patty was a victim of Stockholm Syndrome. They contended that she had been brainwashed by her captors and had been forced to participate in criminal activities under duress. They pointed to her apparent transformation during the kidnapping and the fact that she had shown no previous inclination toward violence or radical politics. Patty, they claimed, was a young woman who had been taken hostage and turned into a pawn in a dangerous political game. The prosecution, on the other hand, had a different narrative. They painted Patty as a willing participant in the SLA's violent actions, arguing that she had actively chosen to join the revolutionaries. They cited her involvement in the San Francisco bank robbery, where she was caught on camera holding a weapon and aiding the SLA members. Patty's actions were hard to dismiss, and the prosecution argued that she had embraced the cause of the SLA willingly, even if her initial abduction was against her will. The public was torn. Some believed Patty was a victim of radical brainwashing, while others saw her as a traitor to the system she had been born into. The media coverage was relentless, and each new twist in the case added fuel to the fire. Could Patty really have been manipulated into becoming a criminal, or had she chosen a life of crime and rebellion? The debate raged on, and the outcome of the trial would be a landmark moment in American legal history. As the trial reached its climax, Patty would take the stand and tell her side of the story. Her testimony would be the most pivotal moment of the trial. But would it be enough to convince the jury of her innocence, or would her own words condemn her? Patty takes the stand, a moment of truth in one of the most dramatic moments of the trial. Patty Hearst took the stand to testify. This was her chance to explain what had happened to her, to give her side of the story. Patty described in detail the days following her kidnapping, the psychological and physical abuse she endured at the hands of the SLA. She explained how she was kept in isolation, forced to listen to radical propaganda, and how she eventually came to believe in the group's cause. Patty claimed that she had been manipulated and coerced into participating in their crimes. Her testimony was emotional and compelling. She spoke of her fear, her confusion, and the sense of powerlessness she felt in the face of the SLA's overwhelming control. But despite her emotional account, the prosecution remained skeptical. They argued that Patty had fully embraced the radical ideology of the SLA, using her kidnapping as a convenient excuse for her actions. The jury was left to decide. Was Patty Hearst truly a victim, or was she a criminal who had chosen to commit violent acts in the name of revolution? The verdict was imminent, and the stakes could not have been higher. The fate of Patty Hearst would be a reflection of America's deepening divisions as the public grappled with questions of justice, loyalty, and personal responsibility. On March 20th, 1976, the jury delivered its verdict. Patty Hearst was found guilty of bank robbery and using a firearm in the commission of a felony. But the true question remained: how could a woman who had been kidnapped and brainwashed be held accountable for her actions? The next phase of Patty's story was about to begin, and it would change everything. Guilty or victim? When the jury returned a guilty verdict, it shocked the nation. Patty Hearst, the young woman who had been kidnapped by the SLA and subjected to months of abuse and manipulation, was now a convicted criminal. The charges were serious. She had been found guilty of participating in a bank robbery and using a firearm during the crime. But the question still lingered. Could Patty Hearst truly be held accountable for actions she took under duress? The verdict sparked intense debate. Many argued that Patty had been brainwashed by her captors and that the court should have taken into account the psychological toll of her kidnapping. Others believed that she had willingly participated in the SLA's criminal activities and that the law needed to hold her accountable for her actions, regardless of her circumstances. Patty's conviction was a turning point in the case. It was no longer just about whether she had been manipulated or coerced. It was about the broader question of personal responsibility. How far should the law go in considering an individual's state of mind when committing a crime? Patty Hearst's case became a symbol of the tension between justice and compassion, and the question of whether a person could be both a victim and a criminal at the same time. But Patty's story was far from over. While many expected her to serve a lengthy prison sentence, the American public would soon be faced with a surprising turn of events. After spending only a short time in prison, Patty Hearst was granted an unprecedented pardon. The circumstances of her release would spark even more controversy. Was it a sign of justice, or an attempt to right a societal wrong? A pardon and the media circus continues. In 1979, after serving only 22 months of a 7-year sentence, Patty Hearst was granted a pardon by President Jimmy Carter. The decision was met with widespread controversy. For some, it was a sign of compassion, a recognition that Patty had suffered enough and had already paid a high price for her involvement in the SLA. For others, it was a betrayal of justice, a sign that money and privilege could once again shield someone from the consequences of their actions. Patty's release reignited the debate about her role in the crimes committed by the SLA. Was she truly a victim, or had she chosen to participate in the radical group's violent actions? The media frenzy that had surrounded her kidnapping continued to haunt her. Despite her release, Patty remained a controversial figure, and her story would continue to be dissected for years to come. In the years following her release, Patty would attempt to reclaim her life. She made public appearances, participated in interviews, and even worked in the entertainment industry. But the scars of her past would never fully disappear. Patty had been a symbol of innocence lost, a victim turned criminal, and a reminder of the complex intersection between personal agency, manipulation, and societal expectations. As the years passed, Patty would reflect on her experiences and the lessons learned from them. But did she ever truly come to terms with what had happened to her? The legacy of Patty Hearst, media, justice, and the public's fascination. The decades following her release, Patty Hearst would become a symbol of the media's power, the public's obsession with sensational stories, and the complexity of human psychology. Her case raised important questions about the criminal justice system, the role of the media, and the impact of radical ideologies on individuals. Patty's legacy was complicated. On one hand, she was a victim of radical extremism, a young woman who had been manipulated and brainwashed into committing crimes. On the other hand, she was a criminal who had actively participated in violent acts that left lasting scars on the people involved. Her story was a cautionary tale about the dangers of radicalization and the fragile nature of identity in times of political upheaval. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of Patty Hearst's story was how it illustrated the intersection between media, power, and public perception. The media had played a pivotal role in shaping her narrative. First as a helpless victim, then as a radical accomplice, and finally as a woman struggling to reclaim her life. In the end, Patty Hearst was as much a product of the media as she was a victim of it. Patty Hearst's journey, from heiress to hostage, from captive to criminal, was a complex and multifaceted story that left an indelible mark on American culture. But in the end, the most important question was this: what does her story say about us? The society that watched her every move, the media that shaped her image, and the justice system that tried to make sense of it all. Patty Hearst's life was more than a headline. It was a mirror reflecting the dark, complex forces at play in a turbulent world. The story of Patty Hearst is one that continues to captivate, confuse, and challenge us. It's a story of manipulation, identity, and the power of the media. But it's also a story of resilience and survival in the face of extraordinary circumstances. Patty Hearst's journey from heiress to hostage to revolutionary is a testament to the complexities of the human spirit, and it will forever be a part of the American consciousness. Thank you for joining us in exploring the remarkable and controversial life of Patty Hearst. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more in-depth analyses of historical events and figures. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a new episode.